You're listening to Advice from Your Advocates, a show where we provide elder law advice to professionals who work with the elderly and their families.
I'm Bob Mannor. I'm a nationally board certified elder law attorney from Mannor Law Group in Grand Blanc, Michigan. And today we have a really interesting show for you. So myself and some of my staff had the opportunity to go to Amsterdam to visit something called the Dementia Village. Our law practice is often called elder law, so we do estate planning, we do wills, powers of attorney, trusts. We also do planning for folks that have a loved one with dementia, and that's one of the big practice areas that we help families deal with the financial and legal and caregiving issues that come up when you have a loved one that has dementia. So we do long-term care planning and Medicaid and veterans benefits. And so as part of this, we're always looking for different ways to provide the best care to our families and our loved ones, especially when there is a dementia diagnosis. And so we had this opportunity to take 3 of our members of the firm over to Amsterdam and visit this village they call Hogeweyk. Joining me today is our Director of Planning Services at Mannor Law Group, Amy Persails. Amy, thanks for coming.
Good morning.
And Amy, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what is a Director of Planning Services at Mannor Law Group?
I've been with Mannor Law Group for 12 years, and I oversee our Medicaid planning department and also our care navigation department. We help people, just like you said, Bob, loved ones, helping them get the care that they need, making sure that they're taken care of, should they have dementia, Alzheimer's, or any other physical ailments that they need some nursing home care, AFCs, assisted living, or just home care.
So you mentioned care navigation. So care navigation is a really unique thing that it's very unusual for a law firm to have that, but it's basically advocacy for families through trying to figure out how do we make sure that our loved one is well cared for, that they have the best quality of life, best quality of care, especially if there's a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or any of those types of things. It can be very difficult to follow that path to go through what I consider kind of a maze of different options. Can we stay in our home? A lot of people would prefer to stay in their home and get care in their home. Can we have family members help? Well, sure, but often those family members are giving up on being with their own family or working, and maybe is there a way we can compensate them for the care that they provide their loved one? Are we going to pay, paid caregivers? Are we going to rely on community benefits and community opportunities? Maybe there's day programs that our loved one can go to, or then, of course, we can look at independent living, assisted living, nursing home, all those types of things. But in any of those settings, it is difficult to make sure that we're getting quality care and quality of life. And that's what our care navigators do. Many are social workers in our office. So you don't often find law firms that have social workers as employees, but we do. And it's for the purpose of making sure we help our families get the best quality of care and quality of life. So as part of that, we always look for new things or new opportunities to learn more about how to provide the best care and how to provide the best quality of life. And Amy, I think you and I had both heard about this Hogeweyk, which is a dementia village near Amsterdam, for a long time. What were your initial impressions before we got to go there? What were you thinking about Hogeweyk or the dementia village? We probably didn't even know the name Hogeweyk at the time. We had just heard about this dementia village. So before we went, what was your impression? What did you think about it?
So I interpreted like more of a fake village, I think. A fake bus stop, maybe a post office sign, or a restaurant sign, but not necessarily having all of those things. I knew that they had a grocery store, but we didn't know how necessarily it was incorporated. Did they just go there and pick out something? Did the family shop there? How did that all work? And we found out a lot of it wasn't fake. It wasn't fake at all. It was all real, every part of it. So it was very eye-opening.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I had, the same kind of impression. I really didn't know what to expect, to be honest. And so what the thing is that we had heard of this, and I just assumed, okay, well, you get a little bit more of a community feel. It's maybe not that much different than the way we experience the things here because, typically when somebody has dementia, especially if they're getting care outside of their home, but even when we are getting care in our home, much of the focus is on, in the United States, we call it the medical model. In other words, the person with dementia is served. They don't do much for themselves. We bring them breakfast, we bring them dinner. Maybe we probably discourage going on walks because what if the person wanders off? We're trying to really contain and really focus on the safety, which of course this is our loved one. We want them to be safe. We want them to be protected. And I want to ask your impression, but before we get there, I want to kind of tell what this looked like. So we went over with a group of other law firms that do similar things to what we do, and Amy Persails and myself and attorney Kelly King-Penner all went to check this out. And when we first got there, they let us know that this is a community and that we're not to be looking at it as a tourist attraction. So they said, don't get your cameras out. These are people living in this community, and it's kind of weird to be, treating them like a tourist attraction. So they said, leave your cameras in your pocket, leave your phones in your pocket. And then they brought us in and they just kind of talked to us about it. But even after we'd walked through a little bit of the village and then went aside, I still really didn't get it because I had all these questions about, this village, it didn't look all that safe to me. I was worried because there was lots of older folks walking around and it was cobblestone, which is not always even pavement. And I was worried about, how did family come visit? And I just had all these questions, and they did their best to answer their questions. But the main answer they said was, well, just wait and see. I think your questions will be answered once we get a chance to spend some time in the village and just interact with the folks there. So what was your impression once we did have an opportunity to kind of actually go out into the village and explore and, interact with the folks that live there and things like that?
So many things. In particular, we were broken up into groups when we went out, and we went with two people that worked there. One was actually a founder, Eloy. And in our groups, we just wandered around the village, and it was just... It was refreshing, honestly. It was a beautiful day, and we had this woman that came up to us and started speaking. We were with the other group, so Iris was our tour guide, and the woman that came up talked to Iris, and she spoke Dutch. She didn't speak English. She had no ability to speak English. She didn't understand it. She didn't know it. So her and Iris spoke for a few minutes. Iris invited her to come with us, and she did. She followed us around for most of the time that we toured, and she enjoyed herself. Every time we would stop, Iris would point out something or show us something. She would interact also, and Iris was talking to us in English, but then she would interact with her. And Iris told us, she said most of the time she couldn't even understand what she was saying because, your words get jumbled up a little bit when you get older and with dementia. And so
Iris was a native Dutch speaker.
Yes. And so she was having trouble also. But you wouldn't know that. We never knew that there was a divide there between the two of them. They left, they carried on, and then at one point she just went off with another group of her friends from the village and enjoyed the rest of her day. But she had a great time just wandering around with us, going through with the tour. It was they just could do whatever they wanted to do. It was amazing.
And that's kind of what was really the eye-opening thing. This was not a setup. This was where they lived. This is where they interacted, and they encouraged them to be somewhat independent. Now, they're not going to be able to be completely independent because everybody, in order to go to Hogeweyk to be a resident there, you have to meet a certain level of dementia. And so in the Netherlands, they had what they called level 5 dementia, which is pretty far along. This is not the early stages. This is not necessarily where you even remember your loved ones. I think with dementia, sometimes people they'll be able to not recognize their spouse anymore. They might recognize them as a person that cares for them, but they can't necessarily say, this is my husband or this is my wife. They might not be able to identify their children as their children. They just know that they're people that are caring, and sometimes the brain tries to come up with other things. But that's the level of dementia that these folks had. And so what was interesting about it, it was just a completely different model than what we think about here. And so it took us a minute to actually kind of accept it because, there was all these folks that, when we get to that age and we have some memory issues, maybe we're not so balanced on our feet anymore. I just had a couple of questions as we were going. And I'm like, well, what if they fall? And our guide, Iris, said, well, do you ever fall? And I was like, yeah, I kind of do. I'm kind of clumsy sometimes.
I just did the other day.
And they said, well, people fall, right? And I'm like, yeah, well, but we have to protect them. And yes, of course, we're going to do our best to make sure. And they actually did have some interventions to make it less likely they fall. They had these weights on their ankles that made it so that they were more secure in their steps, which I'd never seen before. And I've talked to some occupational therapists in the United States, and at least the ones I talked to had not seen that before. But their theory behind it was that by having these weights on their feet, they're more likely to have a sure step. So they were trying to do everything they could to avoid those falls. But did they say just sometimes people fall? Yes. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a whole different concept, because I think here we would be freaking out if somebody took a fall and we said, oh, but that was uneven pavement. How dare we? We'd probably talk about calling a lawyer or something. One of the questions was, it seems like these folks are just kind of wandering around. What happened? How do we? And there's like, yeah, this is their community. Don't you wander around in your community? If you had a neighborhood, and this is, it was very much modeled after a community in Amsterdam, especially one that might have been a few decades ago. Some of Amsterdam is a little bit more modern, but it was very traditional Amsterdam. And so it looked like a regular community where people walk around. And in Amsterdam, I think it is pretty common for people to walk. There's lots of bicycles. We didn't have a lot of bicycles there. I don't think there's anybody. Well, there was actually the three-wheel bicycles that they had in the Dementia Village. But in Amsterdam, there's drivers, but there's way more bikes and walkers than there are drivers. And so this was their tradition. And so the idea is, okay, because now you have dementia, you can't walk around your community. And that's completely different because they were walking alone. They didn't have someone with them. Now, it was a very, I don't want to say enclosed environment because it was really a whole community, but there was only one entrance and one exit from this community. And what's interesting is the town around it could come into Hogeweyk and go shopping at the shopping center. They could go in and go to the bar there or the restaurant. And so it was very much just a real life experience. And if you think about that is instead of it's just a whole different mindset of, okay, just because somebody is old and have some memory issues doesn't mean that they can't experience joy from taking a walk and not have to be where there's a caregiver standing right next to them the whole time, or that they can't participate in an art program or all the different programs that they had. So give us some examples of what you saw as we were walking around.
So one of the things that stuck with us was someone walking around with a glass in water, just walking around with a glass. And I mean, a true glass.
They don't use a lot of plastic.
It's all like if you get a soda, a pop, you're getting a glass bottle. You get glass in everything. There's not aluminum cans or plastic. And she was walking around with a glass. And we noticed her and thought, wow, someone with advanced dementia, which remember, that's what they have there. Everyone has advanced stage dementia, and she's walking around with this glass. Well, at one point she did drop it and it did break. It shattered. And it wasn't a big deal. They acted like it was not an inconvenience. No one acted like anything was wrong. Someone just came up, swept it up, cleaned it up, and it was over. And, it was fine. It was absolutely fine. But here we would say, okay, no, maybe we should just have plastic cups. We look at the cost and then we look at what could happen. Just like falling. Okay, they could fall, but they could break the glass. Yes, it could happen, but it's okay. We can get more glasses. And that's their whole outlook on everything. It's okay.
When we have dementia, there's a lot of times that we hear things in the long-term care community. They often use the term behaviors, or you may have heard of sundowners. And we ask about that, and they said, well, here at the Dementia Village, we don't have a lot of behaviors. We don't have a lot of what we would refer to as sundowners, where people get agitated in the evening. And their theory was a well-lived day leads to a restful night. And the other part of it is maybe the behaviors are because we're restricting the folks' ability to express themselves or to engage in activities and things like that. And I always, kind of joke a little bit. If somebody told me I couldn't just go for a walk every once in a while, I might not be thrilled about that either. And so now we're expecting people that have maybe lived their life a certain way all their lives, and because they have memory issues or because of their age, we're saying, oh, no, you can't do that anymore. So I realize how difficult this is to understand it from the perspective here in the United States and kind of our model here. And we'll talk in a minute about some of the ways that they're trying to incorporate this in the United States. But it was just really eye-opening, and things like using the term behaviors or trying to distract the person with dementia. Another example, I saw some people going into the grocery store, and I had my question. I said, so sometimes I'll ask a question and then I'll immediately answer my own question. And I did it here and it was wrong. So I asked the question, well, what happens if somebody goes in and they're confused and they kind of shoplift and it wasn't intentional, they were just confused. And so I said, I imagine you just have somebody in the store kind of distract them and redirect them. And they looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, which, I was. But they were looking at me like, that's not how we handle things here. They said, no, we just deal with it. In some cases, they have an account and we can apply it to their account. Sometimes it might be applied to their house, which there's multiple houses that they live in groups of like 6 to 8. And then sometimes they might come and put it back later, but they deal with everybody individually, as individuals like we'd expect to be dealt with. They don't use the distraction thing that we often would recommend here, and I had recommended for years. So talk to us about how they do meals. And before you do that, I was curious as to this woman that was joining us and just had a great day hanging out with the weird Americans that were coming to visit her town or her village. And she had a great day. But then I wondered about, I was getting close to lunchtime. What happens? And we saw she had separated from us for a little bit before lunchtime. And then I saw, and there was a caregiver just casually having a conversation with her. But I could see she was walking her back to her house so that they could have lunch. And it was just very casual and not like, hey, you must move this way. It was, hey, let's have a conversation. Are you hungry? What do you think we should have for lunch today? And move her back. But how tell us a bit about how they talked about how they prepared meals and things like that.
So this is something that was very interesting. So first of all, each house in each area is different. So they have, 188 residents altogether, and they have different housing, traditional housing, contemporary, cosmopolitan. So there's different, the way you grew up is basically how you're put into your housing. And so in the house, every morning, they discuss what they're going to eat today. And they get together and come up with a plan for the meal for the week, for the day. And during that time, then every morning they go to the grocery store and they come back and they'll prepare the meals. Well, for dinner, for instance, if they're cutting up potatoes, someone that lives in the home, someone with advanced level stage dementia, is probably peeling the potatoes with a knife. And it's okay. Someone is there. First of all, they're overseeing, but yet I cut my finger when I peel things sometimes. And so if they cut their finger, it's okay. They'll take care of it. They have medical staff also, but they let the people do the things that they are used to doing. Laundry, they're folding the laundry, they're cutting the potatoes, they're doing the things that make them feel comfortable, which also makes them feel included in the house that they're in.
So the way that medicine is done and long-term care is done in the Netherlands is obviously different than the way it's done in the United States. So there's lots of challenges. So this is a great, interesting concept, and we just learned so much about it from the standpoint of just ideas and thoughts and just different ways of approaching things. And so the one thing on this is that it would be difficult to put that into practice in the United States as it is there in the Netherlands. And this was mostly paid for by the government. They did have to contribute to it. Each person that stayed there had some contribution to it, but it was mostly paid for by the government. And so how would that work here? And there's lots of thoughts and different ideas. And so talk to us, Amy, a little bit about what we've found out about people that are trying to implement this in the United States.
So there are most of the places that have tried to do this in the United States are mostly day facilities. I know that there is a few that are coming up right now, 2 in Wisconsin in particular. There is one in Georgia. They're all over the United States. I believe there's about 6 to 8 of them, but most of them are like day facilities. None of them are like Hogeweyk, and as far as people living there. There is a facility in the works right now in Wisconsin that will be the most like Hogeweyk. You will live there. You will have all of your amenities, the grocery store, a restaurant, everything that they currently have. It's a smaller scale. I don't believe it would house 188 residents, but they're starting out and it's being built. And I think that the concept is there. It's on point as far as that will go. I mean, we're imagining that it would be private pay, but again, we don't know yet. It hasn't been built. Everything hasn't been finalized, but I look forward to visiting that and seeing how they're doing things and how well it's working, because I believe that we could do this in the United States. We just have to put our foot forward and, get that going. And hopefully this works out.
Well, so it is interesting to see what happens. And I know that one of the ones in Wisconsin had started off with a big gift from a family that just wanted to see this. And so that they started off with some, financial support. And so these are all just the types of things that we at Mannor Law Group always try to learn about, and just trying to make sure we have the best perspective and helping the families that we work with get the best quality of life and quality of care, especially when there's a dementia diagnosis. And so if you enjoyed this conversation, just know that we have conversations like this every other week on our podcast, which is called Advice from Your Advocates. And you can find it anywhere that you find podcasts. You can also find us on our website, mannorlawgroup.com, or on YouTube. So if you have anybody that is in need of guidance for long-term care planning, dementia support, even estate planning, wills and trusts, things like that, feel free to give us a call. You can visit us at mannorlawgroup.com or call our local number 810-694-9000. We also have a toll-free number 800-990-6030. And thank you so much for listening to Advice from Your Advocates. We're always happy to provide information and be a part of your team for the heroes out there that are caring for loved ones, working through the issue of a long-term care need for their parent or spouse has dementia or Alzheimer's. And we can be a guide there. We can be a source of information and advocacy so that you can do the best job that you can to get the best quality of life and quality of care for your loved one. So thanks again for listening. And again, this is Bob Mannor and Amy Persails from Mannor Law Group. We hope that you join us on our podcast, Advice from Your Advocates.
Thanks for listening. To learn more, visit mannorlawgroup.com.